Hello and welcome to Section 1, Episode 22 of the LUFC Fan Zone podcast. I'm Sam Isles.
And I'm Jack Ellis.
And each episode we'll be talking to an ex-Leeds United player or manager about their time at the club. All of our episodes can be found on our LUFC Fan Zone YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And last episode, we were former Leeds United striker Luciano Becchio, with Fidi Bissoni also coming along to help Luciano out with his English. What stood out for you in that episode, Jack? Because he had some really interesting tales to tell about his time at Leeds, especially how he joined the club in the first place, because I completely forgot that it was originally on trial.
No, yeah, it was. He had a lot of interesting stuff to say, really. Obviously signed from third division side Madeira with McAllister just 2 weeks after and signed a 3.5-year deal. But what stuck out for me was that he had the opportunity to re-sign for Leeds in 2015, was it?
Yeah, that's what you said, wasn't it, with Massimo?
Yeah, and obviously Massimo didn't pick up the phone. So, no, yeah, that was a real, not an eye-opener, because you kind of predict Massimo would do something like that, but it was a little bit of a shock, let's say.
Yeah, and I knew Luciano scored a lot of goals for Leeds, but until I actually started preparing for the episode, I didn't actually know how many that he'd scored, because it turns out that he's the 10th highest league goal scorer in Leeds United history.
Yeah, well, according to Wikipedia, it's 75 goals in 190 appearances in League One and Championship, which isn't a bad return at all. And also, he never scored less than 11 goals in 5 years, which also is very impressive. And for me, my favourite goal is probably the playoff semi-final against Millwall at Elland Road, with that famous belly slide towards the, what would you call it? What would have been the away fans now?
Yeah. I think he said that was his favourite goal as well, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah. I think he did.
Yeah, but on to today's episode, and today with the former manager and someone who replaced Uwe Rosler as the club's head coach in October 2015. After arriving at Leeds with the side just 1 point above the relegation zone, he guided Leeds to a 13th place finish, winning 14 out of his 38 championship matches at Leeds. His initial contract was only until the end of the 2015-16 season, and following the final match of the championship campaign away to Preston, he was still unsure if he would be the head coach of Leeds for the following year, with Massimo Cellino leaving him in the dark about a possible extension. However, 3 weeks after that match at Deepdale, it was finally confirmed that he would be leaving the club and replaced by Gary Monk. However, 3 weeks after that match at Deepdale, it was finally confirmed that he would be leaving the club and replaced by Gary Monk, something which Cellino stated was needed to achieve the targets for the 2016-17 season. That's right, this week we're delighted to be joined by former Leeds United head coach, Steve Evans. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure, and associated with such a great club, it's a privilege.
Just before we do start talking about your time at Leeds, which was 5 years ago now, which seems mad, you're now the manager of Gillingham and currently sit mid-table in League One. And you've been there since the start of last season, so how will you find your time there?
Yeah, it's a totally different project to, of course, what was at Elland Road. But, you know, it's a club that for the previous 4 or 5 years to be going in, Sam, they've been fighting relegation, really, with a week or two to go. And there's no hidden secret, they have the smallest resources in the league. And when I met the chairman, he was very upfront about that. But he said the job would be to come in and build something over 3 or 4 years. And you know, and I know as a manager, certainly at Elland Road, but as a manager, you don't get time. So that appealed. Whether that comes to fruition, we'll see. But I think we're well on schedule to be building something with young players and building something that will see the team be capable of challenging to go into the Championship. And it's a club that could sustain that. The only professional club in Kent, so to speak, with the nearest neighbours, West Ham and Palace, so a long way away. So it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, it sounds good, and we wish you all the best. And like Sam said, it's been over 5 years now since you arrived at Leeds in October 2015, which is mad because it definitely doesn't seem like 5 years ago to us. And just to start with, Steve, when were you aware that Leeds wanted to bring you to the club? Because you became Leeds' head coach just hours after previous manager Uwe Rosler was sacked after just 12 games at the club. So were you approached when Rosler was at the club?
No, I was even approached before Uwe Rosler got the job. But at the time, Mr. Chirino had a chat with me through my agent, made it clear he wanted to bring me, but made it clear that at that stage, he didn't want to be paying Rotherham United a lot of money. We just had some tremendous success at Rotherham. So he didn't want it to be the case, and so for that couldn't happen. And obviously I was, for a few weeks, disappointed because the opportunity to be head coach or, managing Leeds United, I never thought my wildest dreams it would come, and you never think it'll certainly come again when he said he wasn't going to go and pay that compensation and he would move on to his alternative, and it turned out to be Uwe Rosler. And so from that point of view, that takes it back to the summer of prior to me going in. But no, the first time I became aware of Massimo being reinterested, if you like, was on the evening. I'll remember it very vividly, where Bobby Zamora scored for Brighton to Elland Road, I think, to win 2-1. A very, very late goal. And I was watching a game actually at the Ricoh Arena, Coventry and Blackpool, 0-0, worst game ever. And I was in the traffic to come out, and the call come up from a mobile which I didn't know, and I thought it was one of my mates mimicking that it was Massimo with this Italian accent, saying he wants to meet me on Sunday evening, and so I went off the phone saying, if this is really Massimo Cellino, you'll call me from the Elland Road switchboard. And the next thing, about 2 minutes later, guys, a Leeds number come up. Of course, I didn't know the Leeds United number, but switchboard come up, and a young lady said, "We've got Mr. Cellino for you." And it sunk in. There's me in the traffic coming out the Rico, and Massimo just on the phone said he just had a chat with Uwe. He would be leaving, and could I meet him on the Sunday? And that's what happened.
Just on the topic of Massimo, we spoke to previous head coach David Hockaday as well, and he said when he met with Cellino, it was quite like a secret encounter, if you know what I mean. It was very private. Was that the same with you, or was it more of an open thing?
I think it was open. I think anyone who had been around, I think there was a lot of Leeds United supporters walking around the stadium. I arrived sort of mid to late afternoon on a Sunday at the main reception at Elland Road. The young lady let me in, and there was a few, I assume, Leeds United supporters walking around, and a few pictures and selfies with a statue, etc. And so it was certainly not cloak and dagger. It was very open. We chatted for 3 or 4 hours on football, and we had a break for an hour, and he asked me to go away then, considering that hour away from him as to whether I would be the head coach. And, listen, guys, I hadn't even got to the elevator, and the answer was going to be yes, but I had to go and cull an hour. And then it was becoming known, because I then had dinner with Mr. Cellino, and my assistant Paul Rayner was asked to come and join us, and we had dinner with Mr. Cellino out in Leeds. So it was becoming a little bit known without it being in any of the press. And then, of course, I went in on the Monday morning.
Like we said, Rosler was the manager previous to you, and he didn't last at Leeds for a very long time, and he wasn't the only head coach at Leeds that had a very short space of time before your arrival. So was that something that you were aware of, but was it something that you had to take into consideration when you were going to accept the job, because it wasn't a rare occurrence for a head coach to be at Leeds for a very short amount of time?
No, I think every head coach, every manager believes in their own ability, and they believe they can make a difference and make a more positive difference. So obviously you've got consideration as to the guys that went before you. But the one call I made was to Neil Redfern, who's a friend of mine anyway. I phoned Redders, who said, if they've offered you the job, you've got to walk there. And I had the same opinion. So it was very easy to be back to Massimo within the hour and said, Mr. Cellino, I'm going to take the job, and I'll never ever forget it. I was very privileged and honoured to be given the role, and still have a lot of friends, as you know, behind the scenes, and a lot of players that, like Stuart Dallas and others, and Liam Cooper, that will remain friends forever.
And you were appointed the head coach on the 19th of October 2015, which was initially on a 1-year rolling contract. But what can you remember about your first day at Thorpe Arch and meeting all the players for the first time?
Yeah, I think it was very strange. I can remember I was on my way to Thorpe Arch, and I got the call from the club secretary just to say that, with my permission, would it be okay if I was half an hour later, because Uwe wanted the opportunity to say goodbye to his players. And some of those players, quite rightfully, would have been there because of Uwe. So it's the least that could be honoured and respected from any head coach to another. So going through the doors into Thorpe Arch, in an office and meeting the group was moments that I'll cherish forever. It's a fantastic facility, as everyone knows. So it was a fantastic group of players, the best that I could manage in terms of ability-wise. And then you start seeing the Peter Lorimers and the Eddie Grays up here, and they're just legends to me, guys. Legends. I'm Scottish born and bred like those two, and they welcomed me with open arms and reminded me maybe that I deserved the opportunity with the success I'd had, particularly at Rotherham. And therefore you get on with it, but it was a fantastic moment.
Of course, you're appointed the Leeds United head coach as opposed to the Leeds manager, which has seemed to be the trend at Leeds ever since Cellino took over the club and something that Radrizzani's implemented at the club. But in your opinion, what do you think the difference is between a head coach and a manager, and which do you think suits you best?
Well, I think I was a little bit different in the sense that when I was appointed head coach, there was no sporting director, there was no chief executive really. There was Paul Bell, who's still there now, and a friend of mine. I speak regularly to Belly, heading up the commercial side. And there was myself and there was Mr. Cellino. So, in effect, guys, the difference of a manager is a manager will pull all together and report into a chairman or a board or a chief executive and make the various proposals. Perhaps in respect of being head coach rather than manager, then you concentrate on the players and everything else around you that you're giving. So there's a clear difference. If you look at Marcello now, Marcello will be given, he'll have a say, of course he'll have a say, but he'll be given a proposal on, say it was a left back, he'll have 3 or 4 left backs, he'll set the criteria, he'll agree it with Victor Orta, they'll agree together, the owner will be involved, and they'll go back with some options. And ultimately I would assume it would be Marcello that would have the final say along with Victor. So that's how it worked now. Whereas in my time, anyone that, we don't have any money at that time, as you know, but if we were going to be going and signing players, the difference of a manager, you'd be doing all that yourself and then working it just between you and the owner, and there wouldn't be a sporting director, but there is now, and it is. And what a great job he does.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were announced as head coach, Steve, you stated in your first press conference the following, that all I can ask for is that the Leeds United supporters is to give me the benefit of the doubt, and perhaps that I wouldn't be chosen manager for many Leeds United fans, and I can understand why they may think that. But the only thing that matters to me is what happens on the grass. What made you think that you might not have been the fans' choice for the Leeds United manager job? Because previously you had, like you said, guided Rotherham, Crawley and Boston to promotions before you arrived at Leeds.
Yeah, I think the only reason being is that you associate Leeds United with the Giants as a giant in football. So therefore you look over the years, and when you do look at the managers that's been there, you're always wondering, coming up through non-league as a manager, whether you're ever going to be good enough to go somewhere like Elland Road. You know, I can remember back in my times at Boston, I was up for Coach of the Year, and my opposite number, David O'Leary, was up for Coach of the Year, and I can remember saying, I think he was in the semi-final of the European competition, and I just beat Dover Athletic. And how can it be us two up and competing with each other? It was, yeah. Listen, it's just, I just felt that it's such a massive club. I was honoured to be there, and I understood if you're a Leeds United fan, I think I'd be right in saying when Marcello got the job, not a lot of people in the game at higher levels knew Marcello. I didn't know Marcello. Marcello. Yeah, I didn't really know about him. I knew where he was and where his career had been, but I didn't know a lot of his techniques and his styles, whereas the big boys did, if they come up against them. And it's fair to say that's the type of coach that would be associated with Leeds. So I was just honoured to be there.
On the pitch, you also mentioned in your first press conference that Leeds hadn't won at Elland Road in the biggest part of 7 months and were sitting just 1 point above the relegation zone after picking up just 11 points from their first 11 games, winning just twice. How did he plan to turn that around? Because at the start of the season, Leeds had invested quite heavily, from previous years, in the squad, bringing in Chris Wood, Saul Bamber, Stuart Dallas, to name a few. And like I said, something which Leeds haven't done in a fair few years, and gave the fans some optimism about the season ahead. However, after that poor start to the season, the positivity was soon lost. The results weren't as expected. And how did you have to turn that around as a manager?
No, I think you're right, Jack. I think sometimes, I don't forget, because as a head coach or manager, you live every minute of it. I don't forget when I went into Leeds, we were a point, as you say, a point above the relegation zone. Performance is described by the Leeds faithful as being very poor and no cause for optimism. But I believe that there was good players there. I believe they had to be probably coached in a slightly different way to how they were being, which is all about an opinion, and bring a real togetherness to the dressing room. And half the players were from overseas, half mostly Italian, as you know, with the Swiss boy and Berardi. But from that point of view, it was a bit bringing a harmony, bringing a togetherness, bringing a desire, and I think we did that not as quickly as we'd like, but fairly quickly. And I think I've always gone on record, and I still maintain it, that had we supported the team with additions in the January window, I think we'd have made the playoffs.
You were appointed head coach on the Monday, just 48 hours before your first game as Leeds United manager against Fulham on the Wednesday. How did you prepare for that match, and how did you know which starting 11 to pick? Because that's quite a short amount of time to decide.
Yeah, well, don't forget we've been in opposition to Leeds United, so we're well aware of clubs that's in our competition, if you like, in the Championship. Well aware because of the close proximity. I'd been to Elland Road the previous season probably 4 or 5 times watching them live. So I had a real good idea with the playing squad. I can remember young Sam Byron get brought in from the cold. He was told he'd no future and he wasn't going to play, and I always regarded Sam as a real top young talent. So he was going to come. I can remember he played at Fulham. So we shaped up the team. We picked it nice and early. We worked with the players on the Tuesday. We got down to Fulham. The boys gave us everything. It's a game we drew. We should have won. But even the optimism on the coach come back from the likes of Saul Bamba, the players in that group, young Lewis Cook, of course, who's now at Bournemouth, but those type of players, when they took the opportunity in long journeys to have one-on-ones and chats to, and they just felt in 3 days a burden was taken off them, and they'd enjoyed the performance and how they tried to play at Fulham. It was 2 up front, wasn't 1 up front, and tried to be really positive, and that's the Leeds United way for me. Try and play good, fast-flowing football and attack rather than defend.
Yeah, and like you said about the match itself, because I went to the game and I can remember it quite clearly actually, and especially when you and the side were walking out for the start of the game, because at Craven Cottage the tunnel is right in the corner, isn't it? Right next to the home fans and right next to that weird neutral end. But because of Leeds' support, of course, the away end was all full and the neutral end was even quite full of Leeds fans as well. And as soon as you emerged from the tunnel with the Leeds squad, I remember the majority, if not all of the Leeds fans, all stood and giving you a good reception as you first came out. How did that feel for you as the head coach, especially given your comments in your first press conference about you might not have been the ideal candidate?
Yeah, and they were from the heart, Sam, when I made those comments on the first press conference. But I think you never know what reception you're going to get as a manager. Sometimes fans could be delighted, they could be buzzing, some could be a little bit subdued. You look at Jose when he went into Tottenham, they wanted doing handstands, were they? So they could be a little bit subdued. They understand there might be a trophies coming, so the fans would support that. But that day I stepped out at Craven Cottage, you don't know what you're going to get. But to a man, to a woman, to a boy, to a girl, they chant him a name, and many times later in that particular year, then I went to different fans events, whether it be in pubs or the supporters associations, and they felt the first press conference words. It was the first time in many, many years they'd heard someone say, I'm probably not worthy of taking this position, but I've been offered it and I'm going to give it everything I've got. And that probably got me the opportunity where the supporters did give me the chance.
And like you said, the game finished 1-1 with Chris Wood scoring a penalty in the second half. But how important did you feel it was to start off life at Leeds, avoiding defeat and picking up at least a point, which was quite a good point as well, because Fulham were one of the favourites for promotion that year? Yeah,
Fulham had big investment into the group. They were flying. I think actually when I took it over, I can remember Martin Glover, who was the head of recruitment at the time at Leeds United. Martin's now in a very senior position at Southampton, of course, but I can remember sitting in the office late on that first day on that Monday evening with Martin, and he said, you could have picked a tougher one in Fulham. He'd watched them the previous week at Craven Cottage or 10 days before and thought they were outstanding, and he said, you could have picked a tougher bit. You were there, Sam. I genuinely think, particularly in the first half, we go behind when we're totally dominating, and we should be perhaps 3 up at the interval, but Second half, we showed a lot of character. We got the goal. And then that last 5 or 10 minutes, I genuinely thought we'd get the winner because we had laid siege to the goal. But that just created, probably even for the supporters, some optimism as we left the stadium to say, well, you can lose games, you can draw games, but it's how you draw and how you lose games. You have to play in a certain style for supporters to understand what you tried to do. And I think they left the stadium at Craven Cottage knowing what we were trying to do.
And moving on from that Fulham game, the next match was an away game at Bolton, which was another 1-1 draw. However, the following week was your first home match as Leeds United head coach, a midweek game against Blackburn Rovers. What was it like?
I remember. Yeah, well, terrifying before the game and terrified to the bit after about 7 or 8 minutes. I think we were a bit 2-0 down inside 5 or 6 minutes. Is that right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Blackburn, in fairness, they were a terrific side, weren't they? They had really good, but they score inside a couple of minutes and then they got a quick second one. And you're thinking, wow, this is... And the only thing I'll say is a huge credit to the Leeds fans because as disappointed they were, and they're probably thinking, well, this guy's lost. It was silence. It wasn't booing. It wasn't turning on the players. They weren't happy. We knew that. But I think the fact that we came out in the second half and perhaps we should get back in the game, maybe be a goal, and it creates a little bit of a grandstand finish. But I just think the fact that the players came out and fought and run and worked hard had a little appreciation, despite the fact that you're 2-0 down so early. But the worst imaginable home debut as a manager you could wish to have, isn't it? 2-0 down in minutes.
Yeah, but following that Blackburn game, Leeds did finally break that 7-month winless run at Elland Road, and you had your first win as Leeds head coach in your third match in charge when you beat Cardiff 1-0. How good did it feel to have that win under your belt, and what impact did you feel it would have on the rest of the season? Because before that game, Leeds were just 3 places above the relegation zone.
Yeah, and it's something I addressed with the players. When you looked at the quality of player we shouldn't be in that position, but as we all know in football, Sam, Jack, you get what you deserve ultimately. And ultimately, if you're not good enough, you're not going to win matches. But leading up to that game, I took real pride in how the goal came about because we spoke to young Lewis Cook about having more strikes from further out the box and not always be seen to go and give a 1-2 and do various things. And I think if memory's right, am I right? This guy's he hit a screamer, didn't he? Hit one from
that midweek game, yeah.
So just a great goal. But we just been encouraging them to get forward more and more strikes at target and things like that. And it was the performance overall. Cardiff come in good form. The club hadn't won, as you say. Everyone around the club was certainly in that game, and even in the game before, was saying, let's get a win, because it's so long since we've sent the faithful home with 3 points, and 7-8 months is unimaginable for most clubs, never mind a club like Leeds United. So I must admit, guys, when the final whistle went, it was just a feeling inside. It's phenomenal. First win, and at home at Elland Road, and in front of a good crowd, and after so long waiting to see one. So it was a brilliant feeling.
And another win at Huddersfield had Leeds 2 wins in 2. However, back-to-back losses against your former side Rotherham and QPR at Loftus Road had Leeds back in 18th in the Championship. But from the start of December to the middle of January, Leeds' form changed completely, and the side went 7 matches unbeaten and picking up 13 points, including wins over Preston and Hull at Elland Road and Wolves at Molineux. So what changed in that spell? Because it seemed like it was a drastic improvement.
Yeah, I think if you took when I went in to when those results come, you're talking 6-8 weeks, and it probably takes that as a minimum to for some of the work of Paul Rayner and the staff, of other staff, of course, to implement the ideas, to get the players to carry it out. But there's none of those wins that you've described there, Sam, in that period in December, mid-January weren't deserved. I think there was circumstances that helped us. I think we. From memory, particularly the win over Hull, we were 2-0 up at half time and could have been 5 up, and then they scored early in the second half and we're hanging on. And then I can remember we go to away to Molineux, and I think we're maybe 1 or 2-0 down, and we had a player injured, and I said, why am I playing 1 up top here? We should have 2 up top to have a play. And we changed it, and we win that, and just whatever. I mean, fantastic following as always from Leeds, and to see the players celebrate with him. It was only 3 points, but it meant so much more given where the depth of despair had been with the fans early season.
And like I said, that spell went into the new year. And in January, of course, you had your first transfer window at Leeds. And during the month, you were quite vocal with the media about transfer activity at the club, which doesn't really happen at the club so much now. But just before we speak a bit on that, how did the transfers happen when you were at the club? Did you suggest players to Massimo about who you wanted to bring in, or did he suggest people that he wanted to bring into the football club? How did it work?
No, it would be the normal course. Like if there was myself and Martin Glover were identifying players to come in. We'd identified, the owner had made it clear there was not going to be any big signings in terms of money. So we were aware of that. But what he did say is he would support us in the loan market. And I can remember I had a couple of 2 or 3 players, maybe 4 players around the country on deadline day ready to come in. And I sat in the office with Massimo, and it was all to go ahead, all to be done, and we were briefing the secretary, and out of nowhere he just changed his mind and said, I don't want to do it. And I can remember, I think it's Leeds United's best sponsor, Steve Parker of Clipper Logistics, who owns that company. He's a good man, Leeds fanatic. And Steve came in like he used to do for coffee with Massimo, and we had a chat, we're talking players, and it even got to the stage where Steve Parker was offering to fund the wages of about 4 or 5 players coming in, but Massimo said it wasn't about the money, he didn't want that to happen, he wouldn't do it under those circumstances, so we didn't. And that was the only night I drove away from Elland Road feeling down about being head coach at Leeds, because I thought, we've taken the club here, you'll be able to tell me, Sam, but probably by that deadline day towards the end of January, we were probably sitting in about 11th position, 4 or 5 points off the playoffs, and these were good players and heavily subsidised by Premier League clubs that we were trying to bring in. And had agreed to come, and everyone was agreed with the club, and it was secretary of the paperwork, and everything was done. And then when Massimo stopped it, the one thing you have to do is respect his right to do that. He's the owner. He has to pay the bills, so you respect it. But it doesn't mean you have to like it. So I drove away quite disappointed. I told him so in a professional manner that all the work I've done there for like 3 weeks has been a waste of time just to change in a whim like this. He said it's his decision and I have to accept it. And you do, as a manager, head coach, you have to accept it. But I was really disappointed because I felt if we did those changes then, I do 100% think we'd have made the playoffs. And I think the people in Elland Road, I think the Sol Bamba's particularly close to Sol, as you have to be with your captain. I was sharing some of the strategy with him and some of the names, and even when we didn't get them in, Sol called me that evening and said, we're not doing them. I said, no. He said, wow, they would have given us such a chance. And so that was the way it worked. You proposed the players, the chairman or the president would be, if he's happy with them, would sanction it. But he not once did he ever tell me to sign a player or pick a player.
Yeah, one of the main things you were very vocal about, Steve, in January was Liam Bridcut, someone who had arrived on loan in November, however was due to return to Sunderland in January, and when he arrived at the club he was arguably one of Leeds' best players, and probably no coincidence that when he arrived just before that 7-match unbeaten streak. However, it seemed that when you were speaking to the media, there was a chance that Leeds would have been unable to keep him for the rest of the season, but it did eventually get completed, as we all know. Was there ever a chance that he could have departed that month?
Yeah, there was. I think Liam was one of the ones identified, and I was able to persuade at that time his football club Sunderland to give us a good player. And we're still there, guys.
Yep, you're right.
We're back. Yeah, sorry. We had to ask his parent club to subsidise heavily his salary because we were asking. Massimo was only giving us an allocated amount, said if you can do it for that, you can get him in. So, because Liam had fallen at the pitch on what he was, I was able to persuade their manager to ask his board to approve it. So, and the agreement was that, quite simply, that may change if it comes. Here's a run of games. We might have much more interest in Liam, so therefore we might ask more for funding. So that was the hiccup in January where Mr. Cellino said no to his parent club's request that if you're going to keep him, we want a bigger contribution towards his wages. So that was the discussions that was going. But thankfully I was able to to persuade his club and Liam to continue at the same level. So we didn't pay any more. And Liam said he's played at Lincoln now. He's getting older now, but he's a wonderful player. He's a wonderful human being. He brought real harmony to the dressing room, brought real class. And you can tell when you sign good players, guys, because they go into your dressing room. You know, and the good players that we had at Elland Road, the Chris Woods, and people like, they just welcomed him immediately because they knew what he could bring, and we went on a good run when Liam was there.
And as for the outgoings, whilst you're at Leeds, the team obviously had a number of extremely talented youngsters with Sam Byram, Charlie Taylor, Alex Moa and Lewis Cook all playing regularly, not to mention Ronaldo Vieira, who you brought in at the first team towards the end of the season. But in January, how confident were you of keeping all four of them players that month? Because it wasn't a secret that the four were attracting Premier League clubs. And I think you even said at one point that there was a total of about £30 million worth of offers all submitted for them at one time in that 1 month.
Yeah. And there was offers that even Calvin Phillips wasn't anywhere near the first team, but there was no championship clubs trying to buy him. And, but there was good offers. There was 3 or 4 in for Lewis. There was 2 or 3 in for Alex Mowat. Sam Byron had a number of clubs that simply had a choice between Everton and West Ham at one stage. Both had agreed a similar deal. And at that stage, you're just hoping that you can keep the best of that young group, because they nowadays at Leeds United they wouldn't be so, because it's a different club today with a different owner who's invested huge sums of money and who's got them to the Premier League by keeping the best players. And if you're at Elland Road, you need the owners to keep the best players. If Leeds have a superstar now, they need to rely on the owner keeping them and not selling them to one of the so-called big 4 or 5 with the big money. So, so I was very fortunate to inherit a lot of those young players, but also brave, as you say, when we brought a couple of youngsters into the team who have gone on to really good things.
But as a whole, how pleased were you with that January transfer window? Because like you said, the players that you wanted to come in didn't come in the end, like the deadline day, like you said, but the club did keep three of the 4 them young players, with only Sam Byram leaving for £3.5 million, which seemed a bargain to some of the fans as well.
Yeah, well, it was a bargain. I think it was, for me, it was, I think we were going to sell him about a week before to Everton for a lot less than that. And I said to Mr. Chillian at the time, we're selling him far too cheap for you. You can't be selling Sam Byram for that money. And he said, well, go and bring me better offers then. So all I did was simply send a message to 7 or 8 managers in the Premier League, and we had immediate response on West Ham, who paid a lot of money for us, a lot more money, I think about £5.5 million or something. So, but I wasn't pleased with the window at all. We'd lost a good young player in Sam, and my agreement back for that was 3 or 4 only loan players, but 3 or 4 loan players, 4 loan players would be coming in to the end of the season, a little bit funded by the transfer fee that we get for Sam, but also to strengthen and help the boys in the dressing room. And I was really disappointed. It took right up until deadline day, but then to be told we're not going to be bringing any in, it was, I can remember speaking to Paul Bell and saying I've just had the worst news ever, and went away in my little apartment depressed. But we bounced in the next morning because you've still got good players, but I think the players felt a little bit down as well, and they felt a little bit down because I kept saying to them all the way through that spell in December, if we have a good run here, the owner will help us strengthen the group. Not particularly take your place, but we'll bring in 3 or 4 players. We don't need 8 players arriving here. We've got very good players, and they bought into that. So I think they felt like down as well. I know I'm particularly the captain.
And that brings an end to section 1 of episode 22.
Join us next week for section 2, where Steve speaks about his final match as head coach at Leeds United at Preston, a match which he thought wasn't going to be his last at the club, after meeting with president at the time Massimo Cellino just days before the match, where the Italian verbally agreed that he would extend his contract to the following year. Thanks for listening.